Hello, my name is Chris Weisdorf. I'm a layman, a regular person, and I'm in finance. I've assisted people in the law as a non-legal professional, as someone who's not a licensee, not a lawyer, not a paralegal, without any formal legal training. I would like to talk today briefly about the law and the state of law in Canada. Unfortunately, the state of law in Canada over the past 4.5 years has been in shambles. It's been in a place I never thought it would get to in our lifetimes. It's in a period right now of disrepair, but it is not irreparable. If you read the release, you'll see that I have three points I'd like to discuss. The first one is the erosion of the separation of powers and division of powers, two different concepts, which directly threatens our democracy, specifically checks and balances on the government. The separation of powers is something I think we've all heard about it at some point. We've all learned about it in school. It is the powers that are distributed between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government. This separation of powers was determined by various legal philosophers over the centuries. It was incorporated in the United States Constitution. And before they actually incorporated it, there was the Constitutional Convention. So back in 1788, quite some time ago, there was a discussion on this, a substantial one. And it's called the Federalist Number 47. It's the Federalist Papers that gave rise to the Constitution and its first 10 amendments. And in there, they described the separation of powers as I just did. And they said that the concentration of power in any one branch of government is not only indistinguishable from tyranny, but is the very definition of tyranny. And I would submit today that that is exactly what we've had over the past 4.5 years. Governments at all branches, municipal, with respect to Councillor Robinson, has experienced that, where executive power has run amok. They are allowed to subvert rights in terms of charter rights, as well as rights under the Human Rights Code, and have abused their powers in doing so. Unfortunately, no court has yet sided with that viewpoint that I just submitted. Executive power has outranked the legislative power and judicial power. If you recall back in 2020, 2021, 2022, the premiers of various provinces, as well as the courts, deferred, that is the proper term, deferred to the executive authority, the experts. They did so repeatedly, and that unfortunately has concentrated all power into the executive branch with respect to public health, but certainly with other matters as well, especially freedom of opinion, thought, belief, and expression, which is guaranteed under our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as the Canadian Bill of Rights federally. There's also the division of powers, which is the division between federal and provincial powers. So in the Constitution, certain things are under federal, other things are under provincial, a lot is under provincial. What they've done is municipal and provincial governments have turned municipal bylaw and or provincial offenses, regulatory offenses, they actually turned them into hardcore criminal offenses. This occurred with Adamson Barbecue, that is Adam Skelly and his defiance and not shutting his restaurant down in November of 2020, defiance of the lockdowns, defiance of the public health orders, as well as we would see later, more than a year later, with the convoy escalating parking infractions and noise infractions, which would ordinarily be punishable under municipal bylaw, into criminal charges. And this continues to happen with respect to public nuisance or common nuisance. It would be with respect to public health, but common nuisance is the criminal charge, as well as obstruction, pursuant to, as I said, municipal or provincial law, which the Supreme Court outlawed back in 1993 in a case called Sharma. This, as I said, threatens directly our democratic institutions and their checks and balances, and especially confidence therein. The second point is regarding systemic abuse of judicial notice, which undermines natural and fundamental justice and the integrity of our legal system. There's a specific definition of judicial notice. There's a Supreme Court case called Find in 2001 at paragraph 48. It is as such. It says a court may properly take judicial notice of facts that are either 1, so notorious or generally accepted as to not be the subject of debate among reasonable persons, or 2, capable of immediate and accurate demonstration by resort to readily accessible sources of indisputable accuracy. Unfortunately, this is being used to an extent that I never would have thought. Previous to the COVID era, judicial notice was generally taken of social science facts, of certain things that originated from government, but things that were, by definition, not scientific or medical. So these, because the government has been wrong so many times over the decades and even centuries with respect to science and medicine. Science and medicine does tend to change quite a bit. So judicial notice was taken of many different things regarding COVID with no ability to challenge the judicial notice other than to bring several experts in a broad capacity, as in the Adam Skelly challenge, which will be heard in October. So this is a substantial problem in that one is not permitted to challenge judicial notice. This is evidence that is brought into the court by the judges themselves, and it is something that has undermined confidence in our courts because evidence that it was duly brought into the courts is not being actually properly assessed or decided upon. The final point is regarding the government's blatant disregard for the law, using what I would say are flagrantly illegal means to enforce legislation and bypassing parliamentary oversight. This is something that is, I've mentioned it quite a few times. It seems to have been adopted in some respects, but people don't understand the plethora of rights that we have in this country, especially in Ontario. There are so many different rights, so many different laws, like the Healthcare Consent Act and laws with respect to the Health Protection and Promotion Act rights in there, as well as many other statutory rights that we have in addition to the Charter of Rights and the Canadian Bill of Rights at a federal level. These various mechanisms have been hijacked or outright disregarded, as I said, blatantly and flagrantly disregarded by the government. The most flagrant abuses I've seen are under the Quarantine Act, Federal Quarantine Act, with respect to testing, simple testing under the Quarantine Act in Section 14. Testing may not enter into the traveler's body. That's Section 14, subsection 1 of the Quarantine Act. Subsection 2 allows one the right of refusal of the testing, of the screening. So many people were convicted as a result of asserting that right, even though it is right there in the Quarantine Act. Various courts, again, this is provincial court, but various justices of the peace have held, and unfortunately were not appealed until I assisted someone in their appeal, Milani Fernando, that anything actually occurred. People were either convicted or they entered into plea bargains where they agreed to be convicted for a lesser fine. On June 26th, the R.V. Fernando appeal was decided by provincial court justice Monahan, and Section 14 was upheld, and the conviction was struck as being unsustainable, and Section 14 was held to be, paramount to the order which said that one must test no matter what. So testing was decided as to be illegal in terms of sustaining a conviction in provincial court. So this is something where the government has really run afoul of the law. It is right there in plain English, Section 14. In addition to the requirements to produce certificates of designation. That's under the Quarantine Act, under the Provincial Offences Act in Ontario, as well as under the Contraventions Act. They continue to abuse their powers. This conduct is plainly wrong, in bad faith, and abuse of power. And as I said, it continues to go on, and I simply demand accountability, transparency, and adherence to the rule of law, as is written by the legislatures and the Parliament of Canada. I invite everyone to simply join me in defending our Constitution and democratic institutions. And most people are not lawyers. One should still make an attempt to know their rights in the law and to exercise them. I would certainly ask that anyone who's had experiences, positive or negative, regarding the Quarantine Act or the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act or the Reopening Ontario Act or anything else, to contact me. My availability is in the press release. I would also say, because these have far-reaching implications for Canada's future, to, in general, promote, exercise, and absolutely not stand for any type of abuse of power. I will end with a quote from 1858 from the great Frederick Douglass, who was a slave and became a free man. He said this: "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them, and these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows, or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." Thank you very much.
All right. I do not see any questions from the media, so. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just seeing if there. I don't believe there are any questions. If there are, I'm certainly all ears.
Okay. Don't see any questions from the media at the moment.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kareem Tadros. I am here as a concerned parent to speak about a very serious issue that affects our children in Canada. But I do not speak alone. I speak also on behalf of the tens of thousands of parents from my city in the Greater Toronto Area, as well as the hundreds of thousands of parents across Ontario, and even the million parents across the rest of our great nation. I can speak confidently about these numbers because these were the parents who came together and coordinated and communicated and pulled off what we now know as the million-person march that took place last year on September 20th. The mainstream media downplayed the size and significance of this event. But as one of the organizers, I saw videos of the mass amount of parents who came together to voice their concerns about radical indoctrination taking place in our school systems. These parents came together and they showed up because they are fed up. And they are so fed up that millions more have joined this movement and will be participating again this year on Friday, September the 20th, 2024. Some have made the effort to deliberately distort the message of these parents that came together and to discredit the voices. So I'm here to make it clear and eliminate any confusion about what these efforts signified. We are not homophobic, we are not transphobic, and we are not anti-LGBTQ. The proof can be found in the very vocal detransitioners and members of the Pride community who stood by and joined us in this movement as well. Our message, to reiterate so that it is never twisted again in the media, is very clear. We stand firmly against the deliberate wave of radical sexualization of children that is becoming very commonplace in Canada, not just in our education system, but in Canadian culture as well. We stand against the deliberate effort to radicalize and normalize this throughout education. We stand against public nudity in public spaces and at family events. We stand firmly against the endangerment of women and children in shared bathrooms and changing rooms. We stand for the rights of parents to have a say in their children's education and to raise them according to their values and their beliefs. These are not children of the state, and parents do have a right to be involved in the decisions that concern their children. We will not stand by while our children are force-fed radical and dangerous ideologies. They do not align with our values, and they do not align with our God-given right to raise our children in the way that we see fit. If religion must be stripped and removed from the public education system, then so too must these radical ideologies. As it currently stands, a multitude of laws and criminal codes are being violated every day throughout the education system. That's why I've reached out this morning to the new Minister of Education, Jill Dunlop. Parents across Ontario welcome her, and we look forward to this as a hopeful step to take the parents' concerns seriously and not to make the same mistakes as the past administration. Similarly, many parents, volunteers, and organizations who are part of this growing movement will be contacting ministries of education across the nation. We remind them that the public school system exists to serve the communities and its families. And if these schools no longer service the communities in which they stand, then it is our job to make sure that we reform them and we rebuild them. Otherwise, we leave the schools and find other alternatives. This year, we have seen one of the largest declines in classroom attendance. We've seen a very large increase in teachers resigning from positions in the public education system. We've identified and cataloged many violations in the public school system which will expose the faculties to endless lawsuits. If parents' voices won't be heard, these classrooms will be emptied until our leaders are ready to listen to parents. We will also hold elected and appointed officials accountable for their contractual obligation to ensure the safety of the communities that they represent. This year, we have seen very serious violations of human rights and criminal code not being upheld. If our voices are not being heard when public nudity goes rampant at so-called pride family events and in front of children under the watchful eye of the police, if voices are not being heard and the police do not take action to uphold the law, then how can they maintain the faith of the community in them? When we marched on September 20th and called on parents across the nation to join us, we were met with open violations, including allowing counter-protests to dominate these spaces and smother our constitutional rights to protest. Hate speech laws were violated that went out and called parents as hateful bigots from every level of administration, including school boards, ministries of education, mayors, city councilors, and even our nation's leaders. When millions of parents take to the streets again on Friday, September the 20th this year from coast to coast, we stand firmly in our belief that we do not oppress anyone else's beliefs. We do not condemn anyone's lifestyle, even if we may not agree with it. We maintain that it is our freedom as a diverse nation that is rich in culture, that we can disagree but still exist unified in peace and with respect for one another. And that includes the respect for families and their God-given rights to protect and raise their children. We call on our leaders to do the right thing and restore the faith of our communities by finding the courage to stand out and speak up and uphold the law and to fight for the innocence of Canada's children. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. Hello, Canada. My name is Kelly Anne Wolfe. I am the CEO of the Canadian Democratic Defence Association. We are an internationally recognized NGO/CSO who advocates for people in Canada when they don't feel that they're being represented. Today, at probably one of the last outlets in our entire country, of which I'm thankful for, here at CPAC, we got to hear from a councillor who is being absolutely degraded, insulted, and even assaulted within government by other government officials. Where is the Minister of Municipal Affairs? I would like to know. Why hasn't the Minister of Municipal Affairs interjected? Why is a council member in any level of government allowed to talk about putting a knife in the back of another councillor and twisting it slowly or beheading their own mayor, and yet he remains in office? This is what is becoming of our beautiful country. A society only ever ends up with the sort of conditions that it asks for. This is a fact. Look around. And who's to blame? I give credit to CPAC because it is a free and open press. That's why someone like me, who can be very controversial, is able to stand up here and talk, and it's broadcast. So I praise and thank you, and you are an example. However, to the rest of the mainstream media out there, who is responsible for spreading misinformation, lies, propaganda, and infusing racism into our population, look what is happening to our country. Look. To every Canadian out there, I want to tell you something. As somebody with 25 years of international human and civil rights who has been around the world and then some, out of 2 billion Muslim people, only 0.1% are radical. The highest population of Muslim people live in Indonesia. Out of 17 to a debatable 26 countries in the Middle East, only 4 are Muslim. Now, I want you to think about that when you're watching the propaganda that implements into your minds that these people are terrorists. They are not. To the Palestinian protesters in Canada, your protests have been infested and infiltrated, and make no mistake, these infestations and infiltrations consist of people who are called astroturfers, that's a term, who are paid by foreign and domestic governments in order to paint a narrative upon you. And the less that you confront those who are radical within, the more guilty you look. So take my advice and tighten up with respect to the law. When it comes to the ideologies in this country, Section 83.01, bracket B, bracket A, III of the Criminal Code of Canada states, anyone in Canada in a seat of public authority who incites, supports, endorses, coerces, or otherwise any ideology upon the public is committing a domestic act of terrorism. So I would like to ask our wonderful justice system and every member of our Supreme Court, where are you? Because everything that has happened to this country in the last 10 years has been ideological. This is how great nations fall. They replace principles with ideologies. And this is why people are always the ones responsible for the society and the conditions they end up in. A government's role is not to manage the people of the country. It is to manage their interests and affairs. Do you want to know why they were able to come and mandate experimental vaccines into your bodies? Because you allow them to intrude upon you when it comes to things like abortion. A government has no business in your body, your bedroom, or teaching your children about sexual positions or even preferences. Your preference is your business, nobody else's. No one has the right to discriminate against you for it, but you don't have the right to shove it down anyone else's throat. Enough. We have so many people across this country that work in government who really, truly mean to serve the people. But you're cowards. I'll be the first person to say it. As a lifetime activist, I will be the first to tell you that an activist's first position is to enforce the laws when they're not being enforced. Because of these actions, myself, I gained the support of members of the judiciary, lawyers across Canada, police forces, and thank God for that. But I'm here to tell you all today that this is all gonna fall down. Last time I was here was February 16th of this year, and I presented an introduction to a campaign where we are creating a blockchain voting model that comes with referendums and recalls that will put the policies in the hands of the people permanently and remove them from the intrusion of foreign and corporate entities. It will limit government down to nothing more than a representative body and remove the political ideologies of which are partisan politics. Every one of you are liberal and conservative, and all of you in various degrees. These political philosophies applied become ideological, and they are invented and imposed for the purpose of division, because if they can't divide you, they can't control you. And this is a fact. And to every member of parliament, this is what we've become. Why is it that Chrystia Freeland gets caught and called out by Larry Brock, Mr. Larry Brock, for stealing $25 million of our tax money, resides over 2 ministries, and has not been removed from the House of Commons? Why is it that Anthony Housefather can preside over a foreign lobby and still be the secretary to our national treasurer? Is this the Canada that we all thought we had? This is going to change. Right now, we have been collecting independents across Canada, and thank goodness Nova Scotia is in the lead. We've got all 55 independent candidates ready to go, so good luck to your political parties, because it's time for the people to take their authority that belongs to them, of which they commission you all to manage, of which you are clearly incapable of, and put it back into the hands of the people. For more information on this, you can visit wearethechange.ca or evolveblockchain.io. That's all I got for today. Any questions?
No, I don't see any questions on Zoom. So
Thank you.
this concludes today's press conference.
Thank you.